In 1580, the Stroganov family of Siberia had a problem. Their salt mines throughout the region were being raided by multiple gangs. To get things back under control, the family sent Don Cossacks, skilled warriors and horse riders, to quash the raids. The Cossacks did just that, conquering most of Siberia in the process. The leader of this force was a man named Timofeyevitch, and he reported seeing something quite interesting beyond the Ural mountain range. The locals said the creature was the wealth of the kingdom and described it as a mountain of meat. Timofeyevitch, however, described the creature as a large, hairy elephant. Officially, mammoths went extinct thousands of years ago. The populations on mainland Siberia and North America went extinct about 10,000 years ago, but a few small populations survived for a few thousand years more. St. Paul Island, off the coast of Alaska, had woolly mammoths more recently. According to an article on Penn State University in 2016, they went extinct about 5,600 years ago, give or take a few hundred years. Or at least that's the number they got from the mammoths that they dated. The team admits perhaps a few survived a bit longer than that. However, there were mammoths that survived even longer. The dwarf mammoths on Wrangle Island off the coast of Russia may have survived as recently as 3,700 years ago. Which, yes, as many articles and videos like to point out, there were some mammoths still alive when the pyramids were being built. If a few small populations of mammoths could have survived for a few thousand years longer than their mainland counterparts, could some other mammoth populations have survived for a few thousand years more in remote parts of the world? One of the earlier written accounts of living mammoths, perhaps the earliest, it's even older than the Timofeyevitch sighting, and is written about in Karl Shuker's book, Still in Search of Prehistoric Survivors. There is an account from the Chinese historian Zimyi Qiuyan from 136 to 86 BC. When writing about animals that were in Siberia, he described one as, quote, elephants covered with bristles. In the 15th and 16th century, there was a creature written about named Wes. In 1911, a Russian anthologist wrote in an essay that the Wes was a large, mysterious animal covered in hair that had tusks. Though Dr. Shuker does mention that there is no mention of a trunk, which seems like an odd thing to exclude if it really was a mammoth. Now, moving forward to the 18th century, we have an investigation into mammoths/American elephants by future President Thomas Jefferson. The American elephant is a little different than the mammoth sightings I want to go into, so I won't be going into them in this video, but don't worry. This video is actually a kind of companion piece to a video by Truth is Scarier Than Fiction. He goes into the investigation by Jefferson and much more in his video, so make sure to check it out after this one. There is a pretty incredible story from 1873 about a man named Sheraton Bachmachnik, an escaped prisoner who apparently found a group of mammoths in a cave in the Alden Mountains of Russia's Far East. But the story gets even more dramatic. According to this prisoner, a 30-foot-long crocodile serpent emerged from a nearby lake and battled with one of the mammoths. The two battled for an hour until the mammoth escaped and ran off. The story has widely been accepted to be a hoax, not only because of how outlandish the story is, but also because it was printed in the paper The New York World, which, in its early days, was one of the pioneers in yellow journalism. yellow journalism is basically printing stories that are very eye-catching but have not been researched so much and don't really have any evidence. Which is another thing. If mammoths were around during the late 18th, early 19th century, knowing the nature of humans, wouldn't someone have attempted to hunt a mammoth for a trophy? Well, according to the next story, someone did. According to scienceblogs.com, in October of 1899, an odd letter was sent to a McClure's magazine. The letter was from a man named Henry Tuchman, and it told the story of how he had killed the last mammoth. According to the story, Henry spent the winter of 1890 in Fort Yukon in Alaska. During his stay, he befriended a local Inuit man who went by Joe. One day, Henry was showing Joe pictures of animals he had hunted in Africa, and when he showed him a picture of an elephant, Joe said he had seen one in the wilds of Alaska. Apparently, years earlier, Joe and his son were hunting beaver when they came across a large mammoth bathing in a lake. The huge animal was called Taiga. Henry was shocked and extremely intrigued. He couldn't go out in winter, but as summer came and melted the ice, he planned the hunt. Joe arranged for a younger man named Paul to accompany Henry on a search. The two men set off, and after a time spent searching, they found signs of mammoth. The signs first led to a cave where they found the remains of many dead mammoths, and a little after that, they found a live mammoth. But they did not pursue it and hunt it right away. Joe had told Henry something interesting, that mammoths were attracted to smoke. Henry theorized this was because they would try to put out fires. So Henry and Joe built a fire and then hid up in nearby trees. Sure enough, a mammoth came to stamp out the fire and was hit by a volley of bullets as the two men fired again and again and again. The mammoth didn't die instantly, but tried to retreat as blood trickled down its mouth and trunk. It took a few more steps before it slumped over and collapsed. They skinned it and collected its bones, and the skeleton apparently ended up in the Smithsonian. Except no skeleton ever arrived, as this entire story was a work of fiction. To be fair, the magazine that the story was published in, McClure's magazine, wasn't trying to publish it as a hoax, but just as a fictional story. But as things go, some people thought it was real, and the Smithsonian received letters asking for more details about Henry Tuchman's mammoth, similar to how Noah got emails about mermaids after the Discovery show, I suppose. The reports did continue into the 20th century, actual reports rather than clearly fictional stories. There was a sighting in 1903, not of mammoths themselves, but of mammoth footprints on Unimake Island. The island is off the coast of Alaska. It is almost 1 million acres, and even today, 93% of it is wilderness. Back in 1903, one newspaper, or possibly two, or maybe even more, reported on a telegram from a Dr. Fritzl. According to the telegram, he personally saw the fresh tracks of a mammoth on the island. The tracks sunk 4 inches into the frozen earth. There was a famous account from 1920 that is recorded in both Dr. Shuker's book as well as Bernard Heuvelmann's On the Track of Unknown Animals. This account comes from a French consul who was living in Vladivostok. His name was M. Gallen, and he heard a story from an old Russian hunter of something curious he found in the expansive taiga forest. The old Russian hunter told Gallen that a few years earlier he had found huge footprints in the taiga and followed them for days before he came upon a pair of large animals. They were described as huge elephants covered in dark chestnut hair with large curved tusks. 16 years later and thousands of miles away at Mount Elbrus, we have our next sighting. According to the book, The Most Mysterious Places on Earth, a man named Grigory Tilov saw 2 mammoths at the base of the mountain. The mammoth pair got within about 15 meters, or 50 feet at one point, and Tilov noted the mammoths were emaciated. He also said they were small, but how small, it doesn't say. They were also missing patches of hair and moving very slowly. Tilov had a rifle on him, but he had no intent on shooting the creatures and wanted them to live the rest of their lives. This story is actually a second-hand account. It was recorded in 1967 by Peter Ziegel, a PhD at Moscow Aviation Center. He was involved in the Soviet Union's first organized study in UFOs, and I guess sometimes UFO and cryptid enthusiasts overlap. Speaking of the Soviet Union, there's also a story of a Soviet pilot in World War II seeing a herd of mammoths in a remote region of Siberia. Unfortunately, there aren't any more details than that, and it seems like no one can trace the origin of this tale. So while it's interesting, there's really not too much to go on. We do have some more recent sightings in the 90s too, in the Yakutia region of far eastern Russia. Returning again to Dr. Shuker's book, we have an account from Gregory Sidorov, who was searching for relict hominins in the area at the time. Gregory was visited by a gold prospector named Oleg Ruzin, and Ruzin told him about how he and 5 other prospectors saw a herd of mammoths in a remote area that was void of human habitat. There were 12 mammoths in all, and they were about 80 to 90 yards from the men. When the mammoths saw the humans, they stampeded away and into the forest. While it does seem like we could trace the story to its source, or at least we have names, I think it should be mentioned that this sighting went through a game of cryptozoologist telephone. So Oleg Ruzin, the prospector, told his story to Gregory Sidorov. Gregory told his story to Dmitry Bayaneov, who passed the story on to a French cryptozoologist named Jean Roche, who got help of Charles Perrier post the story online. So perhaps some of the details may have been lost in translation. We've got a lot of sightings and stories so far, but of course we need a lot more than that to prove that mammoths were still roaming around. An infamous video was released in 2012 of an alleged mammoth crossing a river somewhere in Siberia. The video was from a man and author named Michael Cohen. Now, if you're watching this video, I think there's a reasonable chance that you've already seen this, and you've probably already heard that it's a bear crossing the river with a fish in its mouth, possibly a salmon. And considering how blurry the video is, that sounds reasonable, and for the past decade I assumed that's what it was, just a bear crossing a river. Well, apparently not. Another person came forward, a videographer named Ludovic Petro, who claimed he shot the footage in Siberia in the summer of 2011, and he had the proof. He had an original, non-blurry version of the video from the exact same spot, except there was no mammoth or bear. Nothing was crossing the river. Petro was filming for a documentary he was making about his grandfather's escape from a Siberian POW camp. In an interview he had with Life's Little Mysteries, and it's also printed on Live Science, he said, "I don't recall seeing a mammoth. There were bears, deer, and sable, but no woolly mammoths. I had no idea my footage was used to make this fake sighting." Petro had put his footage up on YouTube, and this is probably where it was taken from. But initially, Cohen denied that the footage was stolen and said maybe they just happened to film at the same spot. But the water and the clouds were matched up, and it was proven it is the same footage. The mammoth footage appears to be handheld, but anyone familiar with Captain Disillusion will know this is a common trick for hoaxed videos. Many programs can add an artificial handheld shake to a video to make it seem more authentic, and if you wait and add it to the final shot after your CG model, you don't have to do any motion tracking. If we take some river stock footage and add our CGI mammoth and some stock water splashes, we get an okay effect, but not great. However, if we start to render the video out in low quality, doing multiple passes, we get a pretty distorted and blurry image, and then we can slap on a handheld effect on top of it, and there you go. That's all it really takes. Most of these sightings so far come from the Taiga, but I want to mention a particularly interesting one from a completely different area. This sighting is actually courtesy of Truth is Scarier Than Fiction, who informed me of it, and I hadn't even heard of it before. Again, make sure to check out his video after this. In 1984, the Princess of Thailand, Princess Yukal, was surveying the forest from a helicopter. The reason she was doing the survey was because a group of conservationists had sightings of hairy elephants, and during the helicopter survey, she apparently found them, and they were larger than usual, with big tusks, and covered in hair. She even took pictures. Unfortunately, I can't find them anywhere. But according to an interview with a Thai veterinarian and well-known elephant expert, the photos weren't so convincing. Quote, "Judging by the photos I've seen of them in the newspapers, these are ordinary Asian elephants." Let's take a look at this from a different angle and respond to some YouTube comments about living mammoths, such as the comment, "Antarctica, that's where they are," and "Antarctica, 100%. Antarctica? That's pretty far from where mammoths were found. How or why could mammoths be there?" I think this may have come from a made-up story about Admiral Byrd. Now, Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd was a real person, and he is described as an American naval officer, aviator, and explorer. And he did, in fact, go to Antarctica. He made the first flight to the South Pole, and he led 5 expeditions there. That's the true part. The fictional part is basically the tale that while he was flying over, he flew over an area of open grassland and saw a herd of mammoths below. This may have come from an ebook called Mysterious Antarctica, which I guess is like historical fiction. The description on the website says, Admiral Byrd's famous explorations of Antarctica in the 40s and 50s yielded much more extraordinary discoveries than has ever been told before now. This amazing photo book includes over 100 never-before-seen top-secret images documenting evidence of mysterious lost civilizations in Antarctica. The book, however, is fictional and contains AI-generated images. To be fair to the author, they specifically left the Dali watermark at the bottom of the images so people knew it was fake. But I guess some people got fooled anyway, and conspiracy theories ensued. Speaking of, another conspiracy about woolly mammoths is related to clones. I already made a video all about mammoth clones and colossal and the whole when will we have mammoth clones and if colossal can really pull it off. However, there have been some theories floating around that they've already done it, that we already have mammoth clones, but it's a secret. I guess the idea is that they have been cloned, but specifically for the ultra-rich and powerful, just to trophy hunt mammoths, without anyone knowing. Well, that's a pretty big claim, so we probably need some evidence, and I haven't seen any. Yes, I know the idea would be that they are covering it up, and so there shouldn't be any evidence if they're doing it successfully. But why? People will be outraged? Sure, but people are outraged by regular trophy hunting right now. There are many things the ultra-rich people do that people don't like. Plus, I feel like these multi-billionaires could fund a national park with mammoths, and then they'll just take a few to hunt, and then you have this sort of moral grey area, where yes, they are hunting some, but thanks to their funding, a bigger population can survive somewhere else. But let's try and circle back around and see, is there a chance mammoths survived longer than expected? So maybe we need to take a look at what caused the extinction of mammoths to see if perhaps some could have dodged that bullet. For many years, it was debated as to whether or not humans hunted them to extinction, but a 10-year study that was published in Nature in 2021 seems to suggest it was a change in climate, specifically a rapid change in climate, that caused their demise. Their food source was pretty much wiped out. Grasses, flowers, and shrubs the mammoths ate died out in the new climate. Quote the study itself, as the climate warmed up, trees and wetland plants took over and replaced the mammoths' grassland habitats. Then, how did the Wrangle Island mammoths survive longer? According to a paper from the University of Helsinki in 2019, the Wrangle Island mammoths died out due to isolation, extreme weather, and the possible arrival of humans. Possible arrival of humans because, as far as evidence goes, the earliest proof of humans on the island comes from a few hundred years after the mammoths went extinct. But perhaps we just haven't found the evidence of humans being there earlier yet. Small populations are also susceptible to collapse, but also it seems a rapid change in climate was involved, which I guess would suggest that Wrangle Island avoided some of the extreme climate shifts from thousands of years earlier from other parts of the world, and had enough food to sustain a small population of dwarf mammoths. So could there be other locations that were similar? Another remote island or valley or something in the taiga that had enough food to sustain others? Well, I'm not so sure about that. To be fair, again, many of these sightings come from the taiga, and the taiga is a forest in the subarctic region in the northern hemisphere. There's taiga forests in Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, and Siberia. Altogether, it's about 17 million square kilometers, or 6.6 million square miles, more than 10% of Earth's land area. Add to that, most of the taiga isn't exactly densely populated, and it seems like it might be the place to hide a few mammoth herds. However, there are some issues with that. All this talk of the taiga reminds me of some of the books I read about Amur tigers, and of how Amur tigers, unlike some of their jungle counterparts, were somewhat easier to track, at least in winter, when their tracks would be pretty easy to find. And tigers are generally solitary. Most scientists seem to agree that mammoths were probably like elephants and moved in herds of multiple mammoths. And they are also kind of big. If we can track a single tiger, shouldn't we be able to track down mammoths inhabiting the same forests? Not to mention, the current day taiga isn't really the correct environment for mammoths. The other thing is that we can spot elephant herds on satellite images. Why not mammoths? Tree cover, maybe? The taiga is a forest after all, but are they always taking cover under trees? Remember, one of the reasons people want to bring back mammoths is that if the mammoths came back, they could trample shrubs, knock over trees, and fertilize the grass, converting some of the taiga into grasslands, because grasslands might reflect more light and keep the ground cooler. So wouldn't we find their footprints or trail of destruction or, them? Then what about all the sightings? Let's go back to Bernard Heuvelmans on the Track of Unknown Animals. In the chapter on mammoths, he remarks on how different native people in Siberia described them as being living creatures, but there are two things of note. One, they were considered to be like giant moles or rats that could burrow under the ground with their tusks. The word mammoth, in fact, may have come from mamantu, basically a giant rat or mole. Truth also shared with me a piece from the book Mysterious Creatures of China, and in it states that there are similar legends from northern China, the Fenshu, underground rat, and the Shumu, mother of rats, as well as some other names. And secondly, dead mammoths have been found in ice throughout history, and people in the taiga would have seen some very well preserved mammoths, and there would have been no way of knowing how recently, or not so recently, the animal had died. Oral traditions have also been known to be carried out for thousands of years, and when you combine all these together, it seems almost inevitable that mammoth sightings and stories would emerge. It's difficult to see how mammoths could still be alive today. But what about 100 years ago? Or 500 years ago? It's not the most ridiculous theory I've ever heard, but without harder evidence, I think I'd put the extinction of mammoths at thousands of years rather than hundreds. Let me leave you on this though. Whether or not someone saw them hundreds of years ago, or thousands of years ago on Wrangle Island, or thousands of years before that, at some point, someone was the last person to see a mammoth and probably didn't even realize it. Thank you so much to my patrons and members. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. to help support the channel, and also make sure to check out the video by Truth is Scarier Than Fiction. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.